Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into material that isn't just challenging, it's fundamentally designed to be corrosive.
Corrosive is the perfect word.
Right. It's aimed at every comfortable belief you might hold about yourself, about spirituality, about everything. Our subject is U.G. Krishnamurti. And his entire body of work, it just functions as this aggressive intellectual demolition of the whole idea of enlightenment.
And self-improvement, too.
Yeah.
The very idea that you can consciously improve yourself.
Absolutely.
That's so right. I mean, the sources you presented here, they're not a guide for someone who's seeking. Not at all. They're basically transcripts of conversations that happened after this profound physical shock to his system.
Yeah.
So we're really not going to get into his early life or any kind of biographical timeline. Our mission today is, well, it's intensely focused.
Okay, so what's the focus?
We want to extract the core, the really unsettling philosophical and physiological insights that he generated, all of it coming after what he kept calling a total neurological catastrophe.
A catastrophe, not a blessing, not an awakening.
A catastrophe. So this deep dive, it's into the absolute dismantling of the human mind, the ego, and, the entire mechanism of searching for truth.
And I think we have to begin with just the sheer radical nature of his declarations, because they really set the scorched earth policy for everything that follows. He just immediately rejects the notion of being an authority.
He does. I mean, in the most absolute terms you can imagine. He stated that his teaching, and he hated that word,
right,
is not protected by any copyright.
Right.
In fact, he explicitly encouraged people to distort it.
He encouraged it.
Encouraged it. Falsify it, misinterpret it, even claim it as their own.
Okay, wait, what is the implication of that? I mean, why would any philosopher want their own ideas to be distorted? That seems completely counterintuitive.
Well, what's so fascinating here is that it's the ultimate anti-dogma mechanism. Think about it.
Okay.
Every great religious or philosophical tradition, it eventually ossifies into dogma, right? Yeah. It gets protected by institutions, by rigid interpretations.
Sure, you have priests, scholars, the whole structure.
Exactly. So by actively encouraging falsification, he made sure his statements could never, ever become a sacred text or another incism.
So if an idea can be distorted, it can't be a truth you just cling to.
Precisely. It forces you, the listener, to grapple with the meaning in the present moment, rather than trying to preserve some historical claim of truth. He wanted his words, as he put it, written on water.
Written on water. So any attempt to build an institution around them is just an immediate betrayal of the whole point.
The very act of trying to preserve it destroys it.
Wow. And he also just completely rejects the established framework of human value, of progress. He moves into the space of just brutal biological realism.
Brutal is the right word.
He asserts that humanity is on a path to total destruction. And then there's this startlingly graphic statement where he suggests that dead people are actually more useful than the living.
And that statement, it just forces you to reject all our sentimental notions about human exceptionalism, doesn't it? When he says dead people possess more utility, he's looking at life from a purely ecological and biological perspective. It's completely stripped of all human psychological value.
So what's the utility?
A dead body returns its molecules to the ecosystem. It feeds countless millions of other living creatures. It continues the chain of life on the planet. A living human, in his view, mostly just consumes and destroys.
He really sees us as a destructive, sort of self-aggrandizing species.
Precisely. He views the human collective as this destructive force, one that just consumes resources and perpetuates psychological violence on itself and everything else.
And he didn't stop there.
No, he even got into this, this dark speculation. He suggested that if we manage to wipe ourselves out through conflict, and only the really resilient species survive, like cockroaches.
Cockroaches, right.
They might mutate, and life will continue.
Yeah.
And that, he said, would perhaps be preferable to our current path.
That is the ultimate antidote to human-centered optimism.
It really is.
And for anyone listening who's holding out hope for, global stability or some kind of lasting peace, UG delivers a very harsh dose of reality there, too. He suggests that what we call peace is merely, what, preparation for the next war?
That's it. For UG, conflict is inherent to the psychological structure we currently inhabit. The brief pause between declared wars, for him, is just a period of resource acquisition and rearmament.
Both psychologically and materially.
Both. True, profound internal harmony, he suggests, is only achieved when the organism ceases to function.
When you're dead.
When you're dead, because that's the only time the striving, separating thought structure stops entirely.
So, right from the outset, he establishes he's not a comfort merchant. Not at all. He's a philosophical provocateur. And his sole aim seems to be to challenge the very structure that makes us seek comfort and hope in the first place.
That's it in a nutshell.
Okay, so let's unpack this. This aggressive refusal to participate in what you could call the spiritual marketplace. UG's primary function seems to be just the total annihilation of accumulated knowledge and wisdom. I mean, the entire library of human experience and philosophy. He wants to tear down what he calls the false structure of accepted truth.
And crucially, he explicitly promises to leave absolutely nothing in return.
Nothing.
He calls himself a fierce destroyer, and that metaphor is just so key. He sees the entire edifice of human thought, spiritual, scientific, psychological, all of it, as a false structure that's rotten to its very core.
Whereas a traditional teacher...
A traditional teacher offers you a new roof or maybe a new floor plan after the demolition. UG makes sure that when the demolition is complete, you, the listener, are left standing in the open air with absolutely nothing to cling to. He takes away the painstakingly accumulated beliefs that people have lived by their whole lives.
He seems almost delighted in this destructive, non-constructive act. His goal for the individual is just profoundly simple.
Yeah.
To have your fundamental
The
question.
one that drives everything.
The question that drives all seeking and striving. To have that question just detonate, explode, and entirely disappear.
And the disappearance of the question is the disappearance of the entity that poses the question.
The I.
The I. When that central psychological striving vanishes, what remains, he asserts, is a flawlessly functioning biological organism.
And a biological organism.
An organism that's free from the constant interference and distortion of the thinking apparatus. This places the ultimate value not on the mind, but on the biological intelligence of the body.
This stance, then, it sets him up for a just devastating critique of organized spirituality, of religion, of all the social structures that house them. He attacked, in his words, the citadels of our most cherished beliefs.
And he did that because he saw society itself as fundamentally flawed. He used to quote Aldous Huxley's observation that society is the organized absence of love.
The organized absence of love.
So therefore, if someone actually achieves that state of functioning intelligently without the psychological interference of the I, there is absolutely no place for that genuinely free man within any existing social structure, spiritual or secular.
Okay, so why? Why does a genuinely free person pose such a threat to society?
Because society uses its members as a means for its own existence and its own perpetuation.
It needs us to play a role.
It requires conformity, goals, purpose, a shared set of anxieties and hopes just to maintain stability. A person who has dropped all psychological need for continuity, who lives without the drive of accumulation, whether it's knowledge, wealth, or even virtue, that person is completely unpredictable.
Uncontrollable.
Completely uncontrollable. They can't be mobilized for war or for commerce or even for spiritual uplift. They become this non-participating threat to the system's ability to maintain itself.
And in this natural state that he describes, what is left of the complex needs that drive, 99% of human activity?
He is incredibly restrictive here. He says the only desires that remain are the simple biological necessities.
Which are?
Survival, nourishment, and procreation. That's it. Every other need, all psychological needs, all spiritual cravings, the desire for moksha, for liberation, for connection, or fulfillment, he dismisses all of it as baseless.
Just inventions.
Purely inventions of the mind, attempting to perpetuate itself and its own sense of, manufactured significance.
And this is why he completely refused to participate in what he called the guru business. The sources are clear on this. He founded no schools, no ashrams, no centers for any followers.
He was meticulous in his non-establishmentarianism. He gave no sacred texts, no specific practices, or sahonas.
And for anyone listening, a sadhana is just any kind of disciplined spiritual technique, like a specific meditation or breath work.
Exactly. And he gave no public lectures. His communication was strictly limited to these informal one-on-one or small group conversations.
So if he had nothing to teach, why did he even speak at all?
He insisted that he spoke only because the listener's question created the condition for the answer.
He was a mirror.
He often described himself as merely a reflector. He had no message for humanity, no agenda, open or hidden. He just reflected the questioner's desperation and their internal structure right back at them. This was his way of ensuring that his life and his words, as he put it, were written on water.
Utterly impossible to preserve as a doctrine.
Impossible.
This must have been just deeply frustrating for seekers who came to him hoping for a new path, a new answer.
Well, it was intended to be. And his ultimate crushing conclusion for anyone who sought his help was just devastatingly unambiguous. He said, and this is a quote, "I cannot help you solve your basic dilemma or save you from self-deception. And if I cannot help you, then no one can."
Wow. That immediately just removes the entire scaffolding of external salvation, of authority. It forces you, the listener, to realize that the solution, or maybe the dissolution of the problem, is inherently individual. It can't be transmitted or learned or acquired from anyone else.
It's the ultimate rejection of the entire spiritual industry. It confirms to you that trying to use Yuji's insights as a new set of techniques or a new ideology is a fundamental misunderstanding. It's destined to fail because the instrument you're using to seek. That is the source of the dilemma.
Right. And this brings us right to the core of his philosophy. This radical anti-spiritual thesis that the mind itself is a myth. He proposes an idea that challenges the very foundation of how we experience ourselves as unique, private individuals.
This is where we really need to spend some time to dissect his definition of the I or the ego.
Okay.
His core thesis is that the mind, the I, the soul, the ego, it's not an individual separate entity that is unique to you.
It's not.
No.
All right.
He says it is merely the totality of inherited knowledge that's been transmitted through generations and perpetuated by culture, and it's just functioning as a complex organism.
So wait, the self that we feel we possess, our unique personality, my individual fears, my beliefs, my identity, that's not actually mine.
Not in an individual sense, no. He says the idea of a spirit in the machine, that unique, singular essence, is false. There is only the functional output of a complex biological organism.
And that organism is just saturated with collective memory.
Saturated. So the concept of my mind, or your mind, is therefore an illusion of separation. He says the mind is a communal domain. It's like we're all breathing the same air or speaking the same language. It's not private property.
But if we're all breathing the same air of inherited knowledge, how does that knowledge specifically function to create the illusion of individuality? Why do I feel so separate?
Because that inherited knowledge is the structure of comparison. It's valuation, it's contradiction, it's the cultural operating system we all run. It provides the language, the concepts of good and evil, success and failure. The software, exactly. And the mind uses this communal knowledge to create temporary boundaries, the I and the not I, by defining itself against everything else. This dualistic thought structure is the root of all moral, psychological, and social problems, because it's constantly generating separation and conflict. The I is simply the accumulated reaction of this knowledge to the environment.
Okay, let's pivot to the mechanism that perpetuates this structure. Thought. Yuji makes this definitive statement that thought is the primary barrier, and crucially, that thought is time. What does that mean?
This is a critical philosophical leap he makes. Thought is the deferral mechanism. It only operates in two registers. The past, which is memory and accumulated knowledge.
And the future, which is projection and hope.
Exactly. So if you seek to improve yourself, that process of improvement, that better state you're aiming for, is always relegated to tomorrow. Has to be.
Because thought requires the span of time to enact change.
Right. Hope, therefore, resides entirely in the future. It can never be in the immediacy of the present reality. Thought can't deal with reality now. It can only interpret reality through the filter of the past or try to shape a future reality.
And all thought, according to UG, is simply a reaction.
Yes, every single thought is a response dictated by previous conditioning, memory, and knowledge. And this constant reactive process creates what he calls a shield or an armor around the individual.
A shield against what?
Against the raw, unlimited experience of what he calls the river of life. This armor is necessary because the thought structure, this invented identity, it fears that overwhelming flux of existence. The armor protects the fragile identity it has built for itself.
This creates an absolute paralyzing paradox for anyone who's attempting self-transformation, which is, the cornerstone of all spiritual systems.
Just overtrapped.
So if I try to meditate or practice the sadhana, some deliberate technique to control or quiet my thoughts, what happens?
You fail. Fundamentally, because any effort you use to change yourself just perpetuates the very problem you're trying to solve.
The instrument is the problem.
The instrument of change, the effort, the will, the striving, the goal setting, is itself a product of thought. Thought cannot stop thought. It can only exchange one thought for another, or create a new form of resistance.
So if I struggle to be, say, non-egoistic,
your struggle simply feeds the ego with a new spiritual goal of achieving non-egoism. It's a perfect self-defeating loop. You can't win.
So the self or the ego is a mechanism that is self-starting and self-sustaining based on all this inherited knowledge, but fundamentally it has no real physical existence beyond that functional loop.
Exactly. It's an elaborate continuous illusion, a self-created false continuity based on memory, but it has no independent ontological status. The body, the organism, that's real. But the psychological entity that's overlaid on it is fictional.
And this is why he said the body, if left alone, doesn't ask these idiotic questions.
Right. The body doesn't ask about death or immortality. Its wisdom is superior to any philosophy because it operates purely on biological necessity and intelligence.
Many spiritual paths center on heightening awareness or consciousness as a tool to transcend thought. How does UG respond to that idea, the concept of heightened consciousness?
He just dismisses intellectual understanding as entirely worthless. He points out that humanity's reliance on the intellect has demonstrably failed to solve our core existential or social problems.
And consciousness itself.
For him, consciousness is simply brain activity. That's it. It's a biological function, not some spiritual reservoir you can tap into.
So he rejects the whole idea that consciousness can be utilized.
He calls the idea that consciousness is a tool you can use to improve your life or transform the world complete absurdity.
Why absurdity?
Because consciousness is part of the mechanism. You can't use the mechanism to escape the mechanism. He argues that using consciousness to bring about world change, for example, is just the extension of the individual's desire for control and continuation, just written on a larger scale.
But if thought is reaction and we're always told to act spontaneously, what is spontaneous action in his view?
Well, UG argues that the idea of pure spontaneous action free of thought is an inherent psychological contradiction.
How so?
Because in reality, action is thought. Thought and action are inseparable until thought intervenes to create an artificial division. That little space where you think, I will now choose to act.
So what's the only genuine non-thought action?
The automatic, complex, flawless functioning of the biological organism reacting instantly to its environment. Your heart beating, your body instantly withdrawing your hand from a hot stove. Everything else is mediated by the inherited knowledge structure.
Okay, so if the intellectual approach and all forms of striving are just utterly useless, how did UG break out of this inescapable cycle himself? This is where the story shifts entirely from philosophy to something more like neuroscience, what he called the moment of insight and the subsequent catastrophe.
Yes.
And the sources make it undeniably clear that this was not some psychological shift, but a pure physical, neurological event.
This is the centerpiece of his entire teaching, really, because it provides the material evidence for the non-existence of the psyche. The realization happened in Switzerland. He was listening to a friend describe the state of a truly free man, a description he himself had been seeking for decades.
And in that moment,
He had this intense physiological recognition. He realized the description applied to him, sitting right there, listening. He was shocked that he was actively seeking something that he already was.
So the profound part wasn't gaining freedom, but the cessation of the need to search for it.
Exactly. He was forced to question the fundamental assumption of his entire life, that the goal, enlightenment, liberation, freedom, even existed as something separate that you could achieve.
And that led to the big insight.
Right. If there is no spirit and no psyche as an entity, then there can be no psychic or spiritual enlightenment. That recognition just destroyed the whole structure of seeking. He realized, my search is finished. All the questions vanished instantly, and that state of non-striving became his physiological baseline.
And what immediately followed was this physical catastrophic transformation.
It was indeed catastrophic. He describes it not in vague mystical terms, but in cellular and chromosomal language, what he called teleco energy.
Teleco energy, what is that?
It was his unique term for the raw, untainted biological energy. It's similar to what other traditions might call prana or kundalini. He said this energy penetrated his brain through a sensory channel, and it vibrated freely, no longer being intercepted or censored or interpreted by the limiting thought structure.
And this led to a massive physical change.
Yes. This unfiltered energy created what he termed enormous molecular pressure. The pressure was so intense that it had to be released through a destructive explosion. And crucially, this explosion was cellular and chromosomal, utterly physical.
It destroyed his thought structure.
It destroyed the entire thing, and in the process, the mechanism that created the independent I. He frequently described the outcome, saying he no longer saw himself as a person, but as a warm-blooded mammal, a quiet, harmless, dressed monkey, just functioning intelligently, free of the limiting cage of egocentrism. His cultural conditioning, his I, was instantly annihilated.
Let's delve into the specific and frankly surprising physical manifestations that followed, because this is the evidence he offered for his whole philosophy.
The transformation was intensely localized and often very painful. For several days he experienced these uncontrollable spasms across various parts of his body, specifically concentrated in the brain, the nerve plexuses, and the major glands. Yes, there were large visible swellings in the regions of the pituitary and pineal glands, which are traditional centers associated with consciousness, as well as the thymus gland and the larynx. His eyes stopped blinking normally, and even his tear ducts began functioning in a dramatically different way.
That detail about the pituitary and pineal is significant, isn't it? It directly implicates the physical structures responsible for chemical regulation and, in more esoteric traditions, higher consciousness.
Precisely. Yuji's entire argument is that the spiritual problem is actually a neurological or physiological one. The body attempting to process energy that is no longer being limited by the thought sensor mechanism that results in these intense physical changes and imbalances.
And the sources detailed these daily computer failures. That sounds like true biological upheaval.
He described experiencing something akin to clinical dying multiple times a day for weeks or even months. During these computer failures, his body would stiffen up, his heart rate would nearly cease, and his body temperature would drop to the minimum level required for survival.
A state of clinical near-death.
Exactly. Then, just as abruptly, his body would restart itself. The pulse would accelerate, temperature would normalize, sometimes accompanied by these slow, infant-like contractions. It was the organism recalibrating itself without the central processing unit of the I.
And the change to his body, resulting in what he called hermaphroditic characteristics.
This is perhaps one of the most unexpected details. He stated that his body essentially achieved an ideal biological balance. It possessed a level of sexuality that went beyond the dualistic psychological separation of male and female.
How did he describe that?
He noted that his right side reacted primarily to women, and his left side mostly to men, suggesting a profound internal biological union of principles. Furthermore, he noted that the body's energy flow changed. It was no longer intercepted by the psychological structure, but flowed up the spine, through the brain and out the crown of his head.
So this suggests a total loss of the psychological filter, leaving him just completely exposed to the environment.
That's the consequence. His biological sensitivity became extreme. He noted that the movement of celestial bodies, especially the moon, had a noticeable, strong physical influence on him. That's something that the normal person, insulated by the armor of thought, never perceives.
He was literally functioning as an intelligent, responsive biological component of the cosmos.
That's a great way to put it.
The mutation was so deep that he was silent for an entire year after the catastrophe. He had to practically relearn how to think and speak.
Yes, because the entire inherited language structure, which is so intimately tied to the I, was temporarily rendered inoperable. When the thought mechanism restarted, it did so without the self-centered urgency it had before. He often called this state a catastrophe, not a blissful or blessed experience, because the destruction of the separating psychological structure is a terrible physical shock to the organism.
He warned people who sought this state that if you achieve it, you will lose everything. It is not happiness.
No, it's the death of striving, which is the death of psychological happiness. Psychological happiness is always the anticipation of a desired future state. If the future state disappears, so does that form of happiness. He stressed that the body's natural state is peace, and any meditational effort, any sadhana that you use to achieve peace, is actually an act of violence against the organism's natural inherent equilibrium.
So once that psychological thought structure, that communal mind of inherited knowledge, is destroyed, the lens through which Yuji views society, morality, human behavior, it changes completely. Let's start with his really radical critique of ethics and virtue.
He maintains that all moral, spiritual, and ethical values are invented constructs. They're simply lies generated by the thought structure to maintain its own continuity and control. They exist only in the invented future.
Always conditional.
Always. And this leads to his very provocative statement that a person who actively practices virtue is, in fact, a vicious person. That sounds like a complete contradiction. It sounds like one, but it's totally consistent with his philosophy of time and thought. Virtue is never present. It's always projected onto tomorrow. Tomorrow I will be generous, or tomorrow I will become virtuous.
So, by definition, the person remains deficient or non-virtuous or vicious today.
Right. You are vicious today, striving for a future idealized self. This continuous striving and effort to be good is the very mechanism that perpetuates the lie of your present inadequacy, and is thus a violent act against your natural state.
And he had a very, very dark view of the people we considered spiritual leaders or moral advocates, those who advocate for peace and love.
He argued that those who preach peace and love are the very individuals who created the human jungle, which he viewed as far more destructive than the natural.
More destructive, how?
He noted that in nature, animals of the same species typically only kill each other for survival necessities. Food, defense, mating rights. Humans, however, engage in mass slaughter for ideas, for beliefs, for manufactured concepts, and for spiritual righteousness.
Let's consider his view on love and hate. Most systems define them as perfect opposites, the light and the dark.
Yuji saw them as fundamentally the same energy, the same movement of thought, both serving as mechanisms of attachment and self-preservation.
So love, in the psychological sense,
is a powerful form of attachment which, when it's threatened, immediately reverts to fear or jealousy or hate. He argued that historically, both of these movements, whether they're driven by hate for the outsider or exclusive love for one's own group, have led to wars, massacres, and societal violence. They are two sides of the same psychological coin, not opposing forces.
This reframes cruelty not as some moral failing, but as a component of evolution.
He sees cruelty as an indispensable, natural part of the evolutionary process, necessary for the biological organism's survival. The moment we try to moralize cruelty, to eliminate it as an intellectual concept, we just create a new layer of internal violence, because we're fighting a natural instinct. The external violence of humanity, ideological warfare, is far worse than biological cruelty.
So in his view, something like the atom bomb isn't an aberration. It's the logical culmination of our existing psychological structure.
Absolutely. He states that the atom bomb is the logical, inevitable continuation of the police force, the military, and the fundamental desire for protection and self-preservation through external control.
So you can't condemn the bomb.
You can't condemn the bomb, which is the ultimate expression of fear and protection, without condemning the basic psychological desire for safety that drives all human social organization. He argued we can't just reverse the whole momentum of human thought. It's impossible.
This philosophy must radically alter the concept of death, which for most people is the ultimate existential fear. It's the source of almost all religious belief.
It totally neutralizes the fear of death. Yuji argued that the body is naturally immortal, not in the sense of existing eternally in one static form, but because it constantly transforms.
It's recycled.
It's recycled. It never actually disappears. It returns to the soil, its molecules rearrange, and it feeds other life forms remaining in the cycle. The body itself does not need constancy or an afterlife.
And the fear of death is what feeds the spiritual machine.
That fear, he argues, is the source of all religious afterlife concepts, all the myths and promises, which are then ruthlessly exploited by spiritual authorities for material and institutional profit. It's a global spiritual business. Again, he noted that the body, when it's left alone, simply does not ask these idiotic questions about death or immortality. Its wisdom, its intelligence as a constantly cycling organism, is vastly superior to any philosophy, religion, or science we have created to define it.
Finally, let's address desire, specifically the highest spiritual desires. Most practices involve controlling or suppressing base desires in order to achieve higher ones.
Desire for simple biological survival and reproduction is natural. It's essential. Suffering begins when thought intervenes to control, suppress, or moralize that natural desire. But here is its ultimate reversal. Yuji argues that the highest, most spiritual desires, the desire for moksha,
which means liberation or freedom in Eastern thought.
Right. The desire for moksha, for ultimate truth, or for God, are paradoxically the most materialistic desires a person can hold.
Why? Because they're products of thought, which is a material mechanism.
Precisely. Thought is a material instrument. It's the physical output of the brain, a result of the past, of inherited knowledge of biological chemistry. If your ultimate goal, moksha, is conceptualized and articulated and pursued using this material instrument, then the goal itself is entirely materialistic. It's a fabricated commodity.
So he insists the main desire that must disappear is the ultimate one.
The desire for moksha, the desire for liberation itself. Suppressing small, natural desires is a useless, self-defeating strategy if the ultimate desire to be free remains intact.
So the ultimate paradox of human misery is that the very desire to be free of suffering is suffering.
That is the engine of human misery. Since you can't stop thinking, and thinking filtered through the eye is suffering, you will always suffer. The intense self-reflection on suffering, the fight against it, and the striving to end it, that is the suffering itself. It is a continuous, self-perpetuating loop of effort.
We've established that Yuji Krishnamurti rejects all external authority, all morality, and the very existence of the mind as an independent entity. So what is left for the listener? If you're listening and you honestly believe your life is meaningless, what is Yuji's response? Does he offer some kind of psychological relief?
He offers existential confirmation, not relief. He states that the feeling of meaninglessness is all you have and all you ever will have.
That's harsh.
It is, but he says this feeling arises precisely because you are pursuing a false goal. The profound inherited psychological idea that life must have a purpose, a transcendent meaning outside of its simple biological function.
So he strips away the need for an invented purpose.
Yes. And when that idea of an invented, purposeful meaning, the whole psychological scaffolding is dropped, then meaning appears spontaneously in everything you do in daily life, purely and physically. The search for a higher, invented, and absent meaning drains the energy needed for actual meaningful living, which is just functioning intelligently in the present moment.
And here is where he delivers the knockout blow to the seeker. The futility of seeking and the absolute impossibility of receiving external help.
He stresses that the realization that all systems, all teachers, all saviors, and all philosophies are fundamentally wrong and misleading. That's a unique, individual, internal event. When you, the listener, truly, genuinely see this fact for the first time, you will explode, meaning the false structure of your own making will collapse.
And he is blunt about the subsequent state. He explicitly states, you are without any help.
This total annihilation of the past, the entire communal knowledge structure, it cannot be achieved through any effort of will, any spiritual discipline, or any external technique. If you try to acquire this state through effort, you will only board yourself up through psychological striving and potentially die from the sheer physical pressure of the organism fighting itself.
So the realization of total inherent helplessness is the necessary condition.
It's the necessary and non-negotiable condition for the breakdown to occur. You cannot use thought to stop thought.
Let's discuss reason and intelligence in this new free state he talks about.
He defines true intelligence, or reason, as the absolute acceptance of natural, biological, and cosmic limitations. Suffering comes from the constant, inherited effort to free oneself from these necessary limits. For example, he explains our actions are driven by chained reactions, where one action restricts the next. This creates karma.
And he defined karma not mystically, but as action without reaction.
Which is impossible as long as the thought mechanism is present.
Right.
As long as thought is involved, action carries reaction, binding you to the past and the future. True freedom, or intelligence, is realizing that the boundaries are the boundaries, and ceasing the useless, painful striving against them.
And what about that highly desired state that everyone wants, peace of mind?
He states, what you call peace of mind, which you seek, is the continuation of this war, struggle, and effort. Meditation, in the psychological sense of trying to control the mind, is not peace. He calls it war.
Meditation is war.
It's an internal battle that results only in more cruelty, more effort, and more self-violence. Any deliberate effort to control or quiet thought is fundamentally a violent method.
Finally, we have to return to his total refusal to be an authority and why he constantly denied his own statements.
He was intensely aware that human psychology, driven by the need for continuity and certainty, would inevitably try to turn his words into a new ideology or another Kimism. So he preemptively countered this. He often felt compelled to deny his first statement with the second statement and the second with the third. He engaged in this kind of total dialectical negation of everything he had just said.
This wasn't just playful philosophical contradiction, then?
No. His goal was not to assert some convenient new dialectical truth. It was the total uncompromising denial of everything that could be expressed or conceptualized. He insisted he spoke only because the listener's questions created the energy and the condition for the answer, not because he had a saying or a message to deliver to humanity.
So this entire deep dive has been about stripping away every comfort, every hope, and every spiritual scaffolding humanity has erected for millennia.
It has. The central unforgettable takeaway is that the problem you face isn't psychological, it's neurological, it's physical and biological. The I is merely the accumulation of inherited non-individual knowledge, and the body is the ultimate flawless intelligence, functioning harmoniously if the intruder thought the separator's neutralized.
So the search itself is the trap. If you came here seeking answers or methods or techniques, UG confirmed that you are, in fact, without any help from external sources. This material forces you to confront your own inherent biological need for meaning and continuity, and to recognize the massive industries built to profit from that need.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought UG left us with, one that resonates really deeply when you accept his uncompromising neurological view. He often said, the only death that exists is the death of fear.
The death of fear.
So, given his analysis that the body is simply a complex, functioning organism and the mind is a myth, what does it truly mean to live right now, today, functioning intelligently as a biological organism without the promise of a better self, a better future, or different, less vicious world?
The ultimate question he forces us to confront. Can you function today without the hope of tomorrow?
A truly profound and necessary dismantling of illusion.
An absolutely required deep dive into the corrosive anti-philosophy of UG Krishnamurti.